My dear Korean friends, I deeply regret not to be with you, but because of this global pandemic, we are now condemned to communicate through this virtual media, which is much better than not to communicate at all. If I understand well, you have two major preoccupations. One has to do with the branding, the second has to do with globalization. Actually, both topics have a lot in common. And also, you have decided to focus on Seoul, and considering that Seoul is South Korea and South Korea is Seoul, which is very true, at least perceived from the rest of the world. I think that the best answer I can bring, hopefully, in your debate, has to do with the way I personally perceived and perceive today Seoul and South Korea. When I first came here some 40 years ago, and since that time I try to come back at least once a year, often more, South Korea was a totally different country, of course. And the scholars, like myself, who visited the country were always coming for the same reason, trying to understand why this poor, divided country, nearly destroyed by civil war, was suddenly becoming an emerging economy, and what was and is still today universally considered as a success story. So I visited, factories, car factories, Hyundai, and shipbuilding yards in Ulsan, and what I discovered were hardworking people with a lot of discipline, and they working very precisely, and they very sensitive to the quality of their work. And the quality of their work, this organization combined with the global strategy, focusing not on the domestic market but on the rest of the world, and the entering in the era of what later would be called globalization, evidently this was the recipe for economic success. However, something was missing and escaped my initial observation. There was an ingredient which does not belong to economics, and this ingredient is a culture, civilization. What brought all these hardworking people together was a common civilization, a very ancient civilization, and quite unknown in the Western world. In the Western eye, Korea has been stuck between China and Japan, but we hardly understood how different Korea was and how different Korea still is. And this difference is rooted in very ancient times, maybe 3,000 years, approximately, we don't know exactly. And there is a remarkable continuity in this Korean civilization from the origin until today. If you don't take into consideration this concept of civilization, I think you don't really understand what makes Korea different, what makes Korea attractive, and what makes Korea successful. This is very evident in the art. It happens that many of my friends in South Korea are artists, movie production, singers, theater, photographers, plastic artists, and so on, designers. And all of them are very contemporary, very modern, and they know about the world, they know about the other artists, but they're also very much rooted in tradition. And I've not seen that in any other country, actually. If you look at Japanese artists or Chinese artists, they want to forget about the past, and they're interested only in the future. South Korean artists, designers, but also entrepreneurs, are simultaneously focusing toward the future, but also very much interested in their past. And I insist on that because in all the efforts at branding and globalization, it seems to me that this concept of Korean civilization is a bit forgotten. You look outside more than you look inside. So, what is the Korean civilization? It's nearly impossible to define. I always recommend to people visiting Korea or discovering Korea to go to the National Museum in Seoul, which is a unique and not well-known place, and where visitors usually don't go, and where you will see 3,000 years of continuity. And maybe this is the best photo synthesis of what Korean civilization is about. And also there's a definition by Pak Namjoon, the video artist whom I met years ago when he was living in exile. And he explained to me his definition of Korean civilization. He said, Korean civilization was born on the day when a Mongolian horseman met a rice-growing peasant. And I think this combination describes the Korean civilization quite well. The rice-growing peasant is living in a rather disciplined world defined by solidarity. You can't grow rice without solidarity with your neighbors. But also this very strong individualist dimension of Korea, which is symbolically, of course, represented by this horseman coming from Central Asia. So Korea is a combination of both. I think that's the shortest, maybe not the most accurate definition you can give of the civilization, but I think this is very useful when we talk about branding. This interrogation about branding is of course not new. I mean, I'm hearing about it since maybe 30 years, and many people working on branding regret that Seoul doesn't have the Eiffel Tower or Mount Fuji or the Statue of Liberty, and it would be so easy to have an iconic representation of what Seoul is about. But if you don't have something as iconic as the Eiffel Tower, you have other iconic resources which I find underexploited. The landscape, the mountains, the river, which defines Seoul for centuries now. Some objects in the museum, I'm thinking mostly of pottery and the wide porcelain vase with a moon-like shape, which have been designed centuries ago and which look so modern. So I think maybe we could use all these elements to define what Seoul is about. This means that I'm not that enthusiastic about the logo which is being used now to promote Seoul. I think it's a bit abstract. It doesn't convey much meaning. Could be anywhere. And in a way, it's a kind of an imitation of the design which has been implemented by other cities around the world. There's nothing very much Korean about it. I may sound critical, but I just want to be positive and wonder if we could do better by exploiting these undervalued resources. I mentioned civilization, and I'll come back to it. I should mention also the notion, very important in the current world, of safety. I mean, the whole world has remarked that the strategy against the COVID-19 pandemic in South Korea was, of course, not perfect, but it was much better than in other countries. So Seoul was a safe city for its citizens and visitors. and now in a way it's safer than ever. So I think this notion of Seoul as a safe city should be exploited, and this notion of safety goes very far. You are safe in your daily life, you are safe from aggression, you are safe to go and visit the city at any time, and you are relatively safe against the aggression of illness or from people. So Seoul, the safe city, and Seoul, the ancient city. I would like to convey again this notion that Seoul has always been there. It's been ignored. It's been like a well-hidden jewel, a well-hidden secret, but it's always been there. So you have Seoul, the safe city, and Seoul, the eternal city. What about smart city or dynamic city? Well, today everybody wants to be smart or look smart. Or everybody wants to be or look dynamic. So I don't think that the smart city and dynamic city are very useful concepts. I do prefer, personally, safe city, ancient city, eternal city. So this is a baseline. Seoul, the eternal city, or Seoul, the safe city. How do you translate this into an iconic design? An idea came to my mind, rooted again in the Korean civilization. It has to do with the Hangul writing. It's a unique writing. Many people abroad don't know it, don't know how to read it. And I think that this way of writing, which is uniquely Korean, convey a message as well. You know, when you see an Arabic writing, you know it's Arabic. When you see Hebrew, you know it's Hebrew. And when you see Chinese, you know it's Chinese. When you know it's Hangul, you don't know it's Korean. So maybe a designer could synthesize all this, or the proposals I make, in writing Seoul in Hangul, or like if, I mean, in Hangul style, okay? Design letters which will be the Roman letters so that the whole world can read them, but with a kind of design which will remind the very specific writing way of Korean Hangul. So this would be my proposal, writing Seoul in Hangul-like style, and the baseline saying Seoul, maybe the safe city, or Seoul, the eternal city. Or third proposal also, which came to my mind, Seoul, the Asian hub. And it's a fact, I mean, Incheon Airport is the Asian hub. So maybe Seoul could capture this notion of a hub. It's very modern, it's very global. So I also like, beyond the safe city and the eternal city, the hub of Asia, or the Asian hub. Next item in globalization, but as I said before, both are very much linked. Koreans want to be recognized, I mean, as part of the global community, and huge progress has been implemented since 40 years, of course. Not only has become a democracy, it's become a democrat, it's an industrial country, and a giant in many disciplines and in many industries and services. But something is missing in a way. If you compare Seoul with London or Paris or New York, Seoul is a bit, I would say, parochial. Most of the visitors come from neighboring countries, China, Japan, a little bit from the Philippines, but not that much from the rest of the world. It's a bit parochial. I think one of the reasons is that very little efforts have been made to attract students from the rest of the world and teachers and scholars from the rest of the world. why the United States or UK or France global? It's because they have thousands, hundreds of thousands of foreign students and foreign professors, teachers and researchers, which is not the case in Korea. Most of the foreign students would come also from neighboring countries, mostly from China. Therefore, there should be really a very dynamic policy to attract to Seoul universities scholars and students from abroad. I know that the obstacle is the Korean language, which is not widely popular as English or even French. But most of the higher education these days is bilingual. So I do think that the bilingualism in higher education is a way to get around the fact that not many people these days do speak Korean when they are not Korean themselves. So this would be my answer to this question about globalization. Okay, it should really focus on higher education as a way to create ambassadors for South Korea when they return to their country. And back to the iconic and branding, I will only repeat myself in saying that the everything you are looking for is inside you, it's not outside. And just give a specific example before I conclude. The architecture in South Korea, modern architecture is not that great, but you have one great building built by a Korean architect, that's City Hall. And people hate City Hall. I don't know why. I mean, it's uniquely Korean. You have no similar building in the rest of the world. And it's Seoul, and it should be the iconic building in Seoul. I always invite people to go and visit City Hall, which is absolutely unique and remarkable, and which belongs to now to your civilization. So you have to promote it. I think it should be a stamps with the Seoul City Hall, and it's very bizarre that the Seoul would reject its City Hall when the City Hall is that remarkable and built by a Korean architect and Korean artist. Well, I would conclude here, and I think this is an ongoing process, and I'm no prophet. I'm just a friend of South Korea, which is a friend of Korea and the Korean civilization, and my encounter with Korean civilization in a way changed my life, and I do hope that it will change the life of many other people with your help and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Dr. Sorman talked about the opportunities of Seoul as a brand and advice for Seoul brand to grow further culturally. I have two questions for you. First of all, to strengthen the power of Seoul brand, many activities are being conducted. What further effort do we need to make?
I'm no prophet, but however, you ask me many times about recommendations. I wouldn't say there are those recommendations, but suggestions. And one of the things which could be done maybe in a more systematic way is to connect your efforts at promoting Seoul as a brand with the efforts of the private sector. Far from South Korea, millions of people know Korean brands, Samsung, Hyundai, they know K-pop, they often know South Korean movies, South Korean books and songs, but they don't necessarily relate and connect one another. So I think there should be some kind of joint effort to work together more efficiently with the private sector and to convey the fact that when you talk about Hyundai, you talk about Seoul or South Korea. When you talk about Samsung or kimchi or K-pop, those are all part of the same iconic brand and the same civilization. So this should be one more suggestion that I would make.
Thank you for the great advice. My second question is this. I think the essential factor of city branding is sustainability. What are the ways for Seoul to improve sustainability for its city brand?
Hello again. I've been asked me how to boost the sustainability of Seoul City as a brand. I would make only one suggestion, continuity, which strikes me since many years you are working on either South Korea or Seoul as a brand, has been the discontinuity. The message is constantly changing, the communication is not always coherent, so from outside it's sometimes difficult to follow what you are trying to do. So to summarize once again, stick to one choice, maybe not the best one, but one choice, one brand, one icon, and just follow up and never change the message, but on the contrary, insist, and repeat.